I'm Marnie Webb with TechSoup, and I'd like to welcome you to our last day of TechSoup Talks. My colleagues and I at TechSoup, like so many of the rest of us, have been thinking and talking a lot about what's necessary for civil society organizations to be confident, secure, and resilient in the work that they're doing for their community. We know how much pressure organizations are under. We know that threats against them, digital and otherwise, are growing. We know the pace of all kinds of change is fast. Particularly, of course, at TechSoup, we're paying attention to the pace of change of technology. And we believe there's a real need for spaces where people can think across sectors, roles, and geographies. And that's why we brought together these TechSoup talks. It's been 10 talks over 5 days. In the first 4 days of this series, we've heard from experts in cybersecurity, data governance, misinformation, and counter-narratives. These people have come from communities and countries around the world. They're our colleagues out in the field. Today, we're focusing on collaboration. We're turning to members of our own team and hearing from them. Our work at TechSoup depends on the partners we have and our ability to collaborate with them. From the individual developers building tools tailor-made for civil society, to foundations supporting the digital resilience of their grantees, to the partners we work with to deliver on those grants with their own services and knowledge. At TechSoup, we're depending on collaboration. And we believe it's essential for the resilience of civil society and, frankly, for the resilience of our communities. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, my colleague Melvin Chibole, Managing Director of TechSoup Africa. Melvin's experience is in development, community philanthropy, and technology for good, and he brings that in service to organizations. He spent more than 17 years amplifying the voices and supporting the agencies, the communities with whom he works. And he really brings a systemic and social justice lens to this work, and with a particular focus on resiliency. I've had the pleasure several times of hearing Melvin talk about collaboration and the importance of networks, and I'm excited to hear what he has to say today. And with that, Melvin, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Manny. And again, Manny said 17 years, so it means I was born young, in the sense that I'm only 21 and I've had 17 years of experience. That's that aside. I'm very happy again to be presenting my perspectives. One of the things that Manny told us, even as we were preparing for these sessions, is that there are no guardrails. So essentially, it's your point of view based on the context that you're in and just observing and listening. So I'm happy to be the last one because I can only be right. I cannot be wrong. And I'll do my best again to also just reference what has been discussed before in the last sessions and try to tie it up together. Collaboration is now not just a strategy. It's a lifeline now. And why am I saying this? I'll try and locate, again, just the trend that is happening in the world. Yes, some of them have been mentioned, but I would just want to probably give context because context matters, especially in shaping the kind of connections, the kind of collaborations that we'll be building. I'll do my best not to self-promote, but again, I'll be giving examples of what we are trying to do as an organization with the tools that we have, with the spaces that we occupy. So just again to begin and to locate this conversation in terms of collaboration, and I've titled it in my head, The Power of Collaboration Amid Global Uncertainty, because that's where we find ourselves. As we stand now, again, we are in a very precarious moment in global affairs, and it's unprecedented. Yes, during COVID, we sort of went through that wave, but right now I would call it a polycrisis of sorts, because there are too many things that have come together to disenfranchise not just the sector. And when I mean the sector, it's not just the civil society sector, but also the first, actually the second, the third estate, and the fourth estate. That is the media, the judicial systems, a breakdown in democracy. And again, just referencing what has been presented so far. Some of the challenges that have confluenced together is the creep of authoritarianism that is happening. And it's not just in one part of the world. We're experiencing it in different parts of the world. And the thing is with authoritarianism is that other governments that would want to employ that as a way of fighting back dissent borrow from each other. So it's diverse. and very broad. So we are all feeling some sort of it. Another thing that we are also going through is the poison of disinformation. And tied to that is the pervasive threat of data insecurity that has been discussed also this week. And the reality that there is a shrinking space in terms of both financial resources as well as just the power to dissent. So with that, I'll try to give my viewpoints on how collaboration can work in this. But even before that, I'll go into the crux of it. For instance, when you talk about the resurgence of authoritarianism, which is a direct assault to civil society, we are seeing populist governments now cropping up, and they're actively working to dismantle the independent voices that are there. Not just for civil society, but also suppression is a tool that is being employed globally. This includes passing restrictive laws to hamper either registration or operation of NGOs or vilifying activists as foreign agents. I can give an example. I forgot to say, I'm in Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya. In the last 1 year, we've experienced a lot of picketing. And the picketing has been born out of a repressive regime, a regime that seeks to disempower citizens through corruption, a regime that propulses or bring to the forth a lot of almost truths, which is still disinformation. And what has been happening is the security sector has also been responding with disproportionate force. And we've had probably close to 200 young people being killed and upwards of 1,000 either being arrested. And now the strategy has been, you call these dissenters terrorists, so that again the punitive laws are set in, either to deny them bail or instill fear so that others don't participate. And the nucleus has been Nairobi, Kenya. But that dissent has also grown into the region, to Uganda, to Rwanda, to Uganda, to Tanzania. And because of agency that the Kenyans have, we've been exporting this dissent to these countries. You can imagine lawyers from Kenya are going to these countries to represent opposition leaders, to represent young people who've been either jailed or have been killed, simply because the lawyers within those countries are also fearful of representing these dissenters. So that in itself just shows that this authoritarianism, as much as we'd want to say there's a lot of that in the US and in other parts of the world, but we are also seeing it also in the global majority, or the majority world, as we want to call it. Another trend that we are also seeing is the infodemic, disinformation, misinformation, and the erosion of trust. And again, a lot has been said about that in one of the topics this week. But there is this intentional weaponization of information, either through disinformation or misinformation campaigns, directly targeting the credibility and effectiveness of the civil society sector, but also in other jurisdictions in terms of structures that exist to hold the governments to account. And this, again, is not just specific to governments. It's also to the funding architecture that exists there. You can imagine barely 1 year ago, we were talking about localization and shifting the power. That is now almost a distant past, because some of the proponents of these have now pushed USAID into a wood chipper. It does not exist anymore. And then we also have the issue of maligning actors, including state and non-state groups, exploring digital platforms to either spread false narratives which incite violence, especially against dissenters, humanitarian efforts, and collective action. This becomes very difficult. And as I said, the issue now is not abject lies or obvious lies, it's the almost truths. So it becomes very difficult for you to discern what is true, what is not true. And because of that, there's also the sense of fear. Because even when people come to these spaces, you're not too sure if perhaps there are state agents who are also infiltrating into these systems. So again, voice is severely limited because people are just not safe. Another one that I would probably also want to highlight is the crisis of the funding. shrinkage, doing more for less. Actually, there is nothing now. As I've just mentioned, the concept of locally led development is a far distant memory, simply because of everything that has happened. Shifting donor priorities, economic uncertainties, and in the donor countries, a deliberate effort by authoritarian governments to cut off international support for different reasons. And this, again, in itself has curtailed the operations of nonprofits, the operation of the civil society sector to even meet up. I have friends in the sector who are basically jobless now. And this is not so much about them earning a living, but the place they hold in being interlocutors. The only positive to this is that these people still reside in communities, so they become beacons of voice and wherever spaces they occupy. So in that sense, we have a slight advantage that these staff, these consummate policy buffs are able to sort of curate spaces at that level to bring the voices of communities that we seek to serve. There was a state of civil society report done by Civicus, again, which shows this trend and how it's affecting nonprofits, and I would be sharing about that. But the biggest issue for me for this shrinkage of space, especially to proximal organizations, is the crowding out of these small organizations. Because of this shrinkage of funds, we find that erstwhile large organizations who have all the health systems capabilities are now able to position themselves to take advantage of whatever little funds that are there to the disadvantage of the small proximate organizations who would not have that capability. The death of democracy, I don't need to go too much into that. And probably the last one that I would be mentioning at this stage is the challenge of data insecurity, especially which is operating in a very digital minefield that is now the world. We are seeing increasingly civil society organizations, especially because of the very nature of what we do. We are handling vast amounts of sensitive data, from details of vulnerable beneficiaries to information on human rights abuses. And because of that, we become very prime targets, especially for malicious cyber attacks and surveillance. And we lack, as a sector, inadequate resources to protect ourselves. And the challenge is even more compounded because funding for digital security or infrastructure, as well as the skill gap, is not funded adequately. When you bring all those together, you now start seeing why collaboration becomes very important in forging strength in unity, in essence. I work for TechSoup, and perhaps I've been having a very narrow sense of our mission. And I'll read out our mission. Our mission, if I can find it somewhere, many have not put it to memory, but I will do my best to put it to memory. Just a sec. So our mission is to build a dynamic bridge that enables civil society organizations and change makers around the world to access the technology, resources, and knowledge they need to operate at their full potential. But until probably a month, 2 months ago, I looked at that phrase of dynamic bridge. And for the longest time, and perhaps some of our staff members, if they're candid enough, have been looking at the bridge as just a connection. But a bridge is much more than that. Bridge building as a concept presupposes that you are creating an intentional practice of cultivating relational infrastructure. So it's not just a way of connecting one side to the other or connecting like-minded players, but it's about enabling and learning across differences while curating spaces for that. It's about fostering mutual recognition of contribution, especially between proximate and traditional power-holding actors. It aligns fragmented efforts under shared purpose. And the last one that I found very important is it shifts emphasis from transactional partnerships to relational solidarity. And at the crux of collaboration is relational solidarity. So even as we are looking at our role in terms of being a bridge builder, we are looking at all these aspects of what we require to curate spaces, as well as to have that listening ear and connecting, especially different voices, so that these silos can be dismantled. So the practice of bridge building requires created space over time. Then the practice of bridging these builds, bridging the different sector actors, they are able to come and negotiate and form structures. Why is it important for us to look at bridge building as a key cornerstone for collaboration? First is the creating of weaving spaces. We are going beyond just conferences, just convenings, to being very intentional about how we are interacting, especially with small-scale organizations, creating small dialogues like this one. We don't have to have hundreds and hundreds, because again, there is drowning of voices, especially for organizations, for people who are not probably well equipped to articulate, either because of language, because of skills, because of confidence. And you're trying to do that as an organization through what we call quad, which brings together different actors, either because of issue area or just coming together, where we create spaces for these organizations to have conversations, even as they build their capacity through the resources that we offer. We also map ecosystems horizontally using participatory approaches. And this is covered in different projects that we do internally, especially for underrepresented grassroots voices. One of the things that we've been attempting to do in terms of also creating those spaces is shining a light to organizations that are underrepresented, organizations that require resources, either financial or otherwise, so that they are able to do the kind of work that they do within communities. And what we're trying to do with that is seeding organizations by using our voice, which is trusted. And again, we pride ourselves in being an organization that interacts with a number. And when I say a number, I'm talking hundreds of thousands of organizations that come to us for different things. So we are agnostic in how we support them. And I think we are redoubling our efforts in that, being a generalist, so that we capture all these voices and seeing how best we can curate spaces, not just for like-minded organizations, but also for the unlikely organizations, so that there is cross-pollination, as it were. So when I look at collaboration, now to sort of bring it home, when you talk about building collective power against authoritarianism, how can we do this? Or how are we looking at it as an organization? We are forming broad-based coalitions, SCSOs amplifying the advocacy, sharing risk, offering mutual protection. I remember during the Ukraine crisis and us converting our offices in Poland for it to be a center where the refugees would come and be harbored and have a place to stay, a place to protect themselves. And this is the same with many other organizations that have been doing this. So it's creating these centers of reprieve, centers where if an organization would want to seek any kind of support and they don't know where to, TechSoup becomes an obvious choice. I had mentioned about what we are trying to do, for instance, in Kenya, the agency that we have, and cross-pollinating it to the regions. And it's the same thing with all the presenters who've presented here, providing voice, providing expertise that organizations can tap into. Another one, and again, Manny, you can stop me. Sometimes I can go overboard, and I keep saying this is where passion meets competence, because these are lived experiences that we see and we experience. Creating a unified front against disinformation. A lot, again, has been presented in terms of the work that we do, in terms of disinformation, misinformation, and creating narratives that would debunk, but even more important, that would pre-bank some of the misinformation that is being carried out, to inoculate our societies, to inoculate our communities, even before the disinformation happens. So our work on misinformation and disinformation and counter-narratives are attempting to do this, not just in Europe, but to spread it to other parts of the world, so that this work is highlighted in a series, and as we seek to build out very timely skill sets, tool sets that organizations can easily adapt to further their work or to protect themselves, especially when they find themselves at harm. I would suggest that if you have time for you to visit HiveMind, to just see the kind of resources that we've been able to put together for the sector. I'll move very fast simply because of time. Then there's the process of enhancing resilience through shared resources. Collaboration, again, allows organizations to pool scarce resources, share critical expertise, and reduce operational costs. Linda was from Tech Impact, was a speaker in the series. You would imagine that in a very conventional world, we would be competing. But again, TechSoup and Tech Impact have close ranks, knowing that we have inherent capacities that once we bring them together can support the ecosystem. We are almost working in tandem, and sometimes the lines are not clearly drawn simply because we've been able to establish very organic relationships, and not just in providing support to nonprofits, but also creating spaces where we can now manage the infrastructure of different organizations in different sectors. For instance, TechSoup and Tech Impact are providing managed services not only to the US, but also to Africa and Latin, and especially in countries where there are no players to support smaller organizations that would erstwhile require that kind of support. So from our standpoint, sharing those administrative functions, office spaces, different assets that organizations ideally hold that they can lease out, that they can, especially now that we have very shrinking resources that are available for us to push our work. The shrinking landscape, again, we need not go into that. But as an organization, we are looking and saying, what role can we play in terms of enhancing the flow of resources while shining a light to organizations that would erstwhile not be able to be seen, and also looking at de-risking these organizations. Our work, for instance, in NGOs, in providing the EDs, becomes very important. We are looking at seeding organizations, because of how we are structured, it's funders who ask for the EDs. But we are looking at, could we also open it up for organizations to request those EDs directly, so that because of our repository model, they are able to be more visible to nonprofits. And we've moved that validation service to also putting on top of it, say, the STEP framework that we have, which is a bit more nuanced and can benefit organizations beyond just funding, but also making them funder ready by going through some form of due diligence, which is very nuanced, while apportioning risk to both players for them to be able to not only prove that they are proximal and that they can operate at the very highest level, but also to provide them the confidence, especially for funders, that these organizations can be funded and should be supported more, especially when we are having this crowded effect because of shrinking of funds. So, Mani, I'm looking at you to ensure that I'm within time before I even just start doing the principle, but I'm almost done with the principle of effective collaboration and how we look at it. So when we are looking at the principles of how we look at collaboration, and this is something that we have discussed, this is something that we've internalized as an organization, and looking at what we have to offer nonprofits. And at some point, we'll be talking about membership, what we are trying to do with membership and adding value, or how Mani would say, valorizing some of the tools, some of the resources that we have. But at the core, what we are trying to do as an organization in terms of supporting the nonprofit sector is placing some principles for collaboration, which we stick to including in the talks that we are having. For instance, trust before tools become important for us. We want to build relationships. We want to build alliances. We want to build allies from different sources. And because we interact with these 150 1,000 organizations globally, we are able to triangulate some of the issues that we see, how we can bring these parties together. And that's why Pod becomes important for us. A space where organizations can come and seek allyship, can seek voice, and spaces for them to benefit. Another thing that becomes very important, again, is the clarity of purpose. Knowing why we are collaborating. And we have, as we said, we bring together both communities of practice and communities of interest. So once that clarity is clear, then we are able to spin out different cohorts. And as an organization, we usually work with cohorts. We prefer doing wholesale than retail, simply because, again, once we live from those spaces, then we still have those peer-to-peer conversations happening. Equity in decision-making, especially global north, global majority. I think we are one of the organizations that has thrived on a network approach by having different organizations spread all over the world, bringing not just the expertise, but language, which becomes very important in terms of locating context, in terms of expression. And we are at a place as an organization where we are evolving this network for us to be able to be best placed to distill information, to distill occurrences that are happening in different parts of the world. So again, we will be communicating that at a later stage on how we are looking at these renewed ways of our network. Investing in infrastructure, especially technology, while convening spaces, translations, shared legal aid, we are attempting to still, because at the core of who we are, we anchor most of our programs, most of our projects on technology. And technology becomes now very important, especially in this era of AI. But I think one that probably we don't highlight it as much as we should is celebrating the invisible work. Knowing that in all this, and part of this is we are using our own resources, simply because most funders would look at these as not an investable areas, but to us, we prioritize collaboration, and we know it takes time, it takes energy, and it takes care. And that's what we are committed to do, and that's what we'll be committing to do. So in conclusion, Manny, by embracing a culture of deep and strategic collaboration, we see the collective power of civil society, while enhancing resilience and especially innovating in this phase of adversity. So coalitions, forming coalitions, agile alliances becomes very key for us in forming this narrative of collectivism, of subsidiarity, of collaboration. And we are open for business in terms of us just hand-holding or just being that honest broker. That's how we look at collaboration. I would want to leave it at that, Manny. Again, seeking for your direction.
Thank you so much, Melvin. I think this essential idea that collaboration needs to be our agenda. It's not just something that we do that's on the side, but thinking of it as a deliberate part of our collective civil society agenda allows us each to focus on our area of expertise and be able to lean on others across the sector. And I think one of the things I heard threaded throughout is the ability to take on work that others cannot because of safety. Your example of the lawyers working to protect dissidents in other countries in the region. And so how do we think of collaboration as not just help, but that weaving of safety throughout? So thank you so much for this talk today. And Melvin, thank you so much for sharing your viewpoint here. I hope everyone has a good day.